today to our Aim High Navigating Difficult Conversations webinar that's being facilitated by HR Recruit and Penny Wood. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Penny, who will introduce herself shortly. Penny is going to share some strategies which will help you get renewed clarity, focus and confidence so that you can execute those challenging conversations without fear or procrastination. If you do have any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility and we will cover them at the end. I'm now going to hand you over to Penny, who will introduce herself and start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, and hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well today. You're in the right place if you want to learn how to navigate these types of conversations confidently and resolve difficult conversations so that you can create a more positive and productive work environment, right? Because that's what we want. And in terms of what's happening at the moment, it's one of this area is one of the most challenging aspects of leadership. When I'm talking to a lot of people I work with, and that's whether you're addressing things like performance issues or delivering critical feedback or managing conflict. Lots of when leaders have to have these conversations, sometimes they fear that it might damage an existing relationship, so I'm not going to go there, or they might face resistance by the other person, or they just may not know how to steer that dialogue constructively. And they can also these types of conversations can be quite discomforting. They can bring up a lot of anxiety, uncertainty around how the interaction's going to go. And that can often lead us to avoid them, right? It's easier to just avoid it than actually tackle it. But the trouble with that is it just amplifies what the underlying issues are going on, and nothing gets resolved. So kind of burying your head in the sand isn't really an option. So whatever you're dealing with right now, and that whatever reason that you turned up today, I'm really glad that you turned up. I'm going to help you navigate these difficult conversations so that you can do them with confidence and surety. Now, just a bit of housekeeping. It's going to be about an hour long. The session is recorded. You'll have the opportunity to ask some questions at the end, which Jo will facilitate. And you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen, so grab one, whatever you use, Word document, whatever you do. And then lastly, this is your time to leave your work behind. This is your time to develop yourself. So just take a moment to really come into the session, turn the notifications off, turn your phone over so you can't get distracted by it, so you can bring some real focus to the session. So for those of you who don't know me, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a business leadership success coach, and I'm all about taking bold action. All over my social media, you'll see that that's what I talk about a lot. And I work globally, online and in person, and I have three strands to my business. There's executive coaching. I deliver leadership development programs within organizations, and I also coach people in public speaking. You'll see some of the different jobs that I've been doing over the years there, training in different parts of the world. There's an Empowering Girls logo there. I love doing that. That is a volunteer mentoring scheme for Year 9 girls to help them work out, what their path is. So I really love getting involved in that. And I've worked on some really big projects, especially in the construction industry over the years. And so I know what it's like to lead a senior level, and I understand those problems. And that all transfers into my executive coaching. So in terms of today, now I'm sure you're all good at your jobs as professionals, but I'm assuming you're here today because you got to have you need the ability to have difficult conversations, but for whatever reason, maybe you don't like the conflict, so that's why you want to avoid them. Maybe you feel a bit unsure about how to approach them because they can't, and having them effectively, it's quite hard, it's quite a difficult skill to navigate. But or maybe you haven't had any training around them. A lot of leaders that I work with, when we actually unpack what's going on, a lot of the time they say, well, actually, I've never had any training around this. So I hope that you're going to get something from today. My goal is to help you understand why it's important to have these conversations. Look, we're going to look at some of the barriers that may be stopping you. I'm going to share the skills that you need to overcome that reluctance to engage in conversations. And I'm going to share a framework that I've created to help you prepare for those difficult conversations so that you can manage them with kind of empathy, clarity, and authority. And I want you to have an open mind about how you deal with difficult conversations so that you can have really engaging conversations that will help really empower you because they're tough. There's no doubt about it. They are one of the toughest things that leaders have to do. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on with you. If you've been struggling with tackling difficult conversations, this is probably why, people fear conflict. Okay, many leaders worry that confronting issues directly might lead to conflict or resentment within their team. There's a prospect of damaging relationships. I talk to people about that, and they don't want to damage relationships or create a kind of hostile work environment. Another one is emotional discomfort. That kind of leads to that avoidance because difficult conversations can trigger quite strong emotions for both the leader and the other person in the conversation. And also, some people just say to me, I just want to keep the peace, and they prioritize having a peaceful and cooperative team dynamic, keeping those calm waters. But what happens is they forget that all those underlying issues are there, and then suddenly they erupt. So there are some reasons there. Some people choose to sidestep the conversations. Hopefully, they're thinking, "Oh, it'll resolve itself if I don't bother with it," or they don't want to, disrupt that perceived harmony that's out there. But there's procrastination and short-term focus. And maybe also sometimes, there's the urgency of other things. Actually, I've got other things that I need to prioritize. But the research out there has said talks about the top three difficult conversations that managers avoid having with their team, and they are asking for a pay rise, asking for a promotion, or dealing with a performance issue. There are other ones like having one-to-ones, managing conflict within a team or with a stakeholder. That's often really difficult if they're very powerful stakeholders. But there are lots of different things that contribute to why leaders struggle with having difficult conversations. The unresolved issues, that becomes a really big thing about burying your head in the water, and that decreased team morale. It can create, you've got to be careful if you avoid them because it can create real kind of unfairness and frustration. And often I'm talking to people who are not able to have those conversations because their senior person isn't prepared to have them with them. So you've got to be careful that it can create a lot of frustration, and it can erode trust. Trust, it can damage trust between leaders, between your teams. There can be a perceived lack of transparency, accountability, also, so it can create all sorts of issues, and they can create lasting impact for individuals. So for me, if you want to aim high, it's all about having that clarity of thought around how to deal with difficult conversations. And with my free strategies, firstly, I want you to look at what stops you from having difficult conversations. What are some of the barriers that you come up with, and what are some of the reasons that you get stopped? So we're going to look at that. Then I'm going to look at some of the different skills that you need to develop, things that you may not have thought about before. And then lastly, I'm going to share my practical strategy and framework that you can use you can use it immediately. It's a whole framework and structure about how to prepare for these types of conversations. And people have said to me that it's so useful. I had a managing director of an organization say to me, wow, this session that you've done with us, it's completely changed how everybody is communicating. So I hope you're going to find that structure useful. So don't forget to grab your piece of paper and let's get going, because I want you to write down all sorts of things for yourself during this. So, strategy number one, this is all about taking a deep dive into understanding more about the barriers when it comes to difficult conversations. Now, before we move on, I want to define a difficult conversation. And the Chartered Institute of Management has this really good explanation. I quite like it. It just makes it very clear about what they are, because we all have a vision of what we think they are. But I think that's quite helpful. And then the Good Practice Consultancy, they did some work around the key challenges that managers face. And in terms of the percentages, it's really quite interesting in terms of what unfolds. So, in terms of the percentage of managers that they think that that's the most difficult part of their role, 50% of managers were thinking about that. And then look at this. 35% of employees leave their jobs voluntarily because of internal politics or conflict. Now that's, and a lot of those people I end up coaching actually, because they're like, I've had enough. I'm not getting on with, either the external team, the stakeholders, my manager, the organization, whatever it is. So you think about the cost of re-employing people. We know how much it costs, the time, the effort. Sometimes it's 3 months, 6 months to re-recruit. It can take forever. So I think it's a good thing just to, it's a sobering thought just to think about that. Now I want to look at some of the barriers for you. And I want you to do some self-reflection about where you are now in terms of difficult conversations. So I'm going to ask you some questions. And when I ask you, just write down what comes into your, thought immediately. So, why do you find it difficult to have a conversation about a challenging issue? What triggers you when you know you have to have a difficult conversation? What are some of the emotions that come to the surface for you? How do you react when you're having a difficult conversation? When was the last time you had one? That's an interesting question. And in the lead up to the conversation, was there anything stopping you from having it? And if so, what was it? Why did it happen? And I guess, really, in summary, for all of that, is what do you think is your main barrier for having a difficult conversation? Now, I've gone through that quite quickly. That's the kind of thing that I would go into much more detail in a longer session. But I hope it's giving you a little bit of clarity and something's popped up for you around potentially what's stopping you. Because leaders often face barriers that make it challenging to have these types of conversations. And some of the barriers include things like fear of conflict. Lots of leaders avoid these conversations because they don't want that tension. Another one could be, oh, sorry, let me go back there. Oh, 1 second. There we go. Another one could be around people don't like delivering tough feedback or addressing a sensitive issue. Maybe it'll make them unpopular, cause other people to view them negatively. there's a lack of confidence. Sometimes people doubt their ability to handle the conversation. Um, there's also that avoidance of discomfort, right? They're often uncomfortable for both you and the person having them. I know in my career, I've had to have lots of difficult, awkward conversations, and sometimes they can, it's really difficult to kind of learn how to navigate them because there's an uncertainty about the outcome. How's the other person going to react? What are they going to do? Are they going to you know, cope with any criticism or negative feedback? Um, Sometimes there's people feel like there's a power imbalance as well. Especially if you're newer to a role or less experienced than the person you need to confront. That's quite difficult with the new younger managers that are having to deal with older people, older team members that are working with them. Sometimes I speak to some younger leaders who say, I find it really difficult to approach that individual. There can be cultural and social norms in some cultures and organizations. Direct conversation, especially if it's involved, with criticism, it's totally discouraged. So you've got to be aware of that. And also, like I said earlier, some people just don't get the skills and the training for it. And there's can be a perception that, oh, that person won't change. So why bother? So I want you to think about some of the barriers that you face when you deal with difficult conversations. How do they make you feel? What do you notice when you get that emotional response, that feeling from, oh, I've got to speak to Penny. How am I going to do it? Just, I want you to think about what are some of the barriers for you? Because once you understand what they are, then you can start working through them. Okay. But let's look at what happens with some in terms of some of the skills that you need to use. Okay, so I want to move on to strategy number two because there are lots of different skills that you can use to deal with difficult conversations. So I'm just going to look at a couple today, okay, just because I'm very aware of time. The first one I want to introduce you to is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. Big title, right? But it's a really good instrument to use. It was created by Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilmann. They were professors at Pittsburgh University, and they developed it to help people deal with conflict more effectively. And it helps to assess an individual's behavior in conflict situations, especially where two people, their views might not be compatible. And it's designed to measure either your behavior or the other person's behavior. So the axis, in terms of assertiveness on the vertical axis, that's the extent to which an individual attempts to satisfy their own concerns as opposed to the horizontal axis, the cooperativeness, that's the extent to which the individual attempts to satisfy the other person's concerns. Okay, so and within that, you've got those five different areas, and I'm going to go through each one of them individually, and you can use this to assess how you would approach a conflict situation or how another person might approach it using the five different methods. Now, you're not always one. What you'll find is there'll be a preference for you. You'll use one maybe more than the other. And the idea behind today is for you to think, oh, well, I tend to use that one, but maybe I should use that one a little bit more. Okay, so I just want you to think about them because these help you to kind of reframe and re-diffuse the conflict so that because you're preparing and thinking about the different style that you might use. So when I'm going through the five styles, I want you to think about which style you use the most and then which one you think, well, actually, I'm going to use more of that going forward. So let's look at the top left, competing, right? This is all about your own interest, the company's interest. You don't really care about the other person's point of view. Competing is very effective when you want a quick decision or a quick action, right? Or, it's also effective when there's unpopular action that you've got to be taken on important issues. So maybe new ways of doing things. It might be, new laws are coming in, and it's no one's going to like it, but we've got to deal with it, right? They're useful when the issue is kind of vital and the course of action is clear. And they're also useful when you want a quick resolution to the conflict. And they're also justifiable when you're under kind of immediate time pressure. But the risk of losing, so there's a benefit, but there's always a risk. Okay, so the risk of using competing is the losing side is that sometimes the other person can feel a bit helpless or alienated, which makes it harder for you to make that change in the future because sometimes they become more stubborn and inflexible. So you want to be thinking about, how much of competing is going to be useful as again in terms of the risk of if it's an individual, what's this person, is it going to cause issues down the line? Then let's look at the bottom left, avoidance. Now, this type of person uses this strategy to avoid conversations at all costs, right? You're trying to arrange a meeting with them, training, you want to have one-to-one to discuss an issue. They know it's coming and they'll avoid it, or maybe you'll avoid it because you can see something coming, okay? And it's good for a kind of cooling off. It's good for when an issue's relatively trivial or when that you can't win or you can't be satisfied or the other person can't win or when the costs of the conflict outweigh the benefits of the resolution. Okay. They're good for a kind of cooling off period where you maybe want to postpone. You want to use this strategy if you want to postpone it until the conditions for that conversation are a bit more favorable. And it's, they're good when it's important to have more information. So you might use avoidance when it's like, oh, actually, before I speak to Joe, I need a little bit more of information, or I need to reassess the situation. So you may think, avoidance can seem like a negative, but it may be the right course of action depending on the situation. Then bottom left, you've got accommodating. Now, this is used when you prioritize the other person's needs and goals kind of over your own, often at the expense of your own. Maybe it's at the expense of the team or the organization, right? It's effective when you want to create some goodwill. You want to be, demonstrate that you're being reasonable, or you want to keep the peace a little bit, but you want to, all at the same time, build a bit of social credit for later use. So, you might give into one area of the conflict and then the other area, right? We're going to wait a little bit more and we'll address that because we're about, imagine if you're about to be making a load of people redundant, that's a difficult conversation to have. You want to be thinking about how I'm going to use that. Because accommodating is good because it allows both parties to reassess the situation. But the risk with using accommodating too much is that it can lead to feelings of frustration because you've kind of sacrificed your point of view or the other person sacrificed their point of view for other people. So, there's definitely a balance there. And the other thing is that you can reach a resolution a bit prematurely, but the underlying issue isn't really resolved. You really did get to the nub of it. Okay, so you want to be thinking about how you use accommodating. Let's go to top right, which is collaboration. Now, this is effective when people are working together to find a solution that satisfies both parties, their needs and their interests. Okay. So it's good to use when you really want to understand the other person's point of view, and then maybe merge all those different perspectives and insights, and so that they're integrated so you find a solution together. It's good to gain commitment to move forward with a consensual decision. Okay, so that's when you want to use collaboration. Now, the risk of using collaboration is, depending on what the issue is, it can be very time consuming. And it may sometimes mean deviating from a real clear position. So you've got to be careful how you use it. The last one is the one in the middle, compromising. Now, this is good when you want to get a faster solution. It uses less energy. It creates breaks in kind of log jams. You know, if you've got, if that issue's like, if you compromise, you might just unblock one particular area, which allows you to move forward. It's good to use to temporarily settle really complex issues where it allows all sides to move forward. And it's good as a backup style for collaboration and competing. Okay, because kind of everybody wins in a compromise situation. The risk with it is it can often lead to a kind of ineffective or a bit of a mediocre solution, right? And it doesn't necessarily remove that underlying conflict or the cause of that conflict. Okay, so you've really got to think about it. I hope that that's giving you a really good overview in terms of where you are and how you deal with conflict. And maybe you're thinking, oh, I need to use accommodating a bit more, or I need to use competing a bit more. Okay, so I hope that that's helped you. What I want to look at now is having difficult conversations can often evoke lots of different reactions. And people say to me, I just don't know how to handle these types of situations. And you can't have an emotion-free workplace, right? It's just unrealistic. But learning how to handle them versus trying to kind of banish them from the conversation altogether is a much better way of doing it. And Harvard graduate Anne Kramer, she originally co-produced Sesame Street, an American children's TV show, and she said, she's got this great quote. She says, if you understand what's causing employees to react to situations emotionally, you're in a much better position to prevent an outburst by not letting things get to that point. Very interesting, that. I really like that. So you can prevent it, but you need to think about reactions. So let's look at passive reactions. These are things like silence, non-committal responses, avoiding eye contact. You want to set the tone with, if you're starting to notice this, it's got to be a non-threatening atmosphere. Make it clear that the conversation is meant to be constructive and supportive. So with somebody who's kind of passive, you may want to say something like, I really want to understand it from your perspective, Penny. Okay, so it's getting over there to try and get it out of them, what's really going on, and check what that silence represents, because sometimes people need a moment to gather their thoughts. Allow for those pauses and be patient. Okay, because it may be that it's not passive, it's just they need a bit of time. And you can ask open-ended questions, something like, what are your biggest concerns here? So asking that kind of open question helps you to, start to get out of them what's really going on if you get that kind of passive reaction. The next one is if somebody's getting aggressive. Right now, you've got to be calm, assertive, and you've got to have quite an empathetic approach here. You want to try to understand why there's a disagreement. You've got to be curious, keep big open-minded, so that the other person, when they're getting all het up, they can see that you're trying to understand it from their perspective. Okay, keep your tone calm, your body language very neutral. So you could say something like, I understand, Penny, this situation's really frustrating for you, and then whatever you want to say after it, okay? You definitely don't want to be mirroring them because you know that's only going to be escalating the situation. So if you find yourself, getting mad, you've got to say to yourself, no, I can't, take a breath, keep calm. And another way you can get them to elaborate on what's going on is something like, can you help me understand what specifically is causing this frustration? So it's almost like you're not blaming them, but you're saying, I don't really understand. Help me understand what it is for you. Um, Next one is overly emotional. Okay. When people start, especially if somebody breaks down, what you don't want to do is go with it. You've just got to acknowledge the emotion without dismissing it or minimizing it. Okay. And the kind of thing that you could say is, oh, I'm Penny, I can see this is really affecting you, and that's okay. So what I'm doing is I'm acknowledging it, but I'm not going, oh, Penny, I'm really sorry, or you're not going into that kind of you know, uh engaging with it. You're just saying, I can see it's really affecting you, and that's okay. You got to be patient, allow them to process their emotions. You might want to, depending on what they're talking about, you might suggest taking a break. You can say something like, do you want to take a break, take a few minutes to gather your thoughts? You've got to be listening very actively and empathetically, gently guiding the conversation back to the main topic. Okay. So how do you do that? Well, one of the ways you can do it is say, well, okay, when you're ready, we can talk about how to move forward. So you've got to really think about what you're going to say, okay? So that you can still take charge of the situation, but you can be seen to be responding in an empathetic way instead of just, oh, I don't know how to deal with this, I'm panicking. Um, the last one is the diverter or the deflector, right? So you need to notice when they're doing that. And they'll do it and they'll add in a totally unrelated topic and try and get you off on a tangent. You've got to bring the conversation back to the original topic without it being confrontational. So it could be something like, I understand that this other issue is important, but let's first address the current situation that we're dealing with and we're discussing right now. Okay, so you've got to think about, how am I going to bring it back? It's just an assertive, confident, calm manner. And you've got to stay focused. If they carry on deflecting, you've got to rephrase your question to make it more difficult to avoid. So you could say something like, so what do you think your role was in X situation? So what you're doing is you're always asking questions that allows them to give you an insight into what's really going on. Um, you've got to, it involves legitimate concern that you've got to acknowledge, but you might put that concern aside for a later discussion. And you've got in deflection, you've got to avoid shifting the blame. Okay, clarify each person's role and their responsibility. So it could be something like, I understand that there were challenges, but I'd like to focus on your specific contribution and how we can address the gap together. So there's different ways of people who you'll find they'll come in and they'll have a plan of, right, I'm going to get this conversation going that way. So you've got to make sure you bring it back. So I hope that's helped you in terms of how to deal with some of the reactions. Now, having difficult conversations is an essential skill, right? And whether you're addressing performance issues, resolving conflict, giving feedback, I've created this 4-step framework to help guide you through. It's got an accompanying workbook for the framework, which is where the whole conversation is set out for you. And I'll give you access on how to I'll give you details on how to access that workbook at the end of the session, okay? But I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to that's available for you. So number one is start by defining, and this is all your preparation, okay? Be clear about this. This is I'm going to be having a conversation with Joe next week at 10 past 12, and this is me going through, right, what are we going to be talking about? So you want to define the purpose and the outcome, understand exactly what you want to achieve from that conversation. Are you aiming to resolve a conflict, or are you going to be giving feedback, or are you going to be addressing a specific behavior? So define the purpose and the outcome. And with the outcome, you want to write down what you want to achieve from the outcome. So what do you want to achieve for this meeting, and how would you like the other person to go away feeling? And also what they might be expecting from the meeting. So it might be, for example, improved performance, better communication, mutual understanding. Start thinking about what you want and about what they want, okay, in terms of the outcome. You've got to gather all the different facts. You've got to get specific examples, case studies, data, evidence to support you with your points. Avoid relying on just kind of hearsay and generalizations, right? You've got to get the facts straight. So it might take you some time to get that together. Understand the context and consider the broader situation. So what's this conversation about? Are there any external factors that might be influencing the behavior of this person or the issue that you want to talk about? So what's the context behind it? So you've got your facts, context. The next thing I want you to do is to write down, anticipate the reactions. So consider their possible response. How might they react? Might they get defensive? Might they get emotional? Might they get resistance? What happened when I've spoken to them about this kind of thing before? So just anticipate what those might be, and then plan your response by preparing strategies to handle the different reactions that you think you might come across. Now, it might be around, I've got to stay calm. When I deal with Joe, I've got to stay calm. You know, it might be, oh, I know that Joe tends to redirect the conversation. So, or this is going to be a real tough one. So we might have to take a break. Where are we going to take the break? So really think about that. Plan your response. And then the last one for number one around your preparation is choose the right setting. And that's the setting, the time, and the place. Okay. If it's a really sensitive thing, make sure that you have privacy and minimal disruption. I can remember I went through a series of redundancies, and I remember sitting in, it was in one of these glass open offices with all the doors were glass, you could see everything. And I saw people going in and being told about them being made redundant. Everybody could see. And I saw people breaking down in those meetings, and it was really tough to watch. And I just thought, wow, you know, it's just not, you really want to be thinking about what is the topic of conversation, where's the best place to have it. Sometimes it's good to go out for a walk. Now, the interesting thing about that is when you walk and you're side by side with somebody, there's less confrontation, and there's a kind of rhythm when you walk that it calms people down and relaxes them. And I remember a difficult conversation I had with somebody, and I had to do, I decided that that was my strategy. And we went for a walk around the block, and this person ended up, you know, ended up having quite a long conversation about what was really going on. And it just created a completely different space. And the outcome was incredible, actually, without going into detail. But the person, you know, completely changed their behavior. It was sorted out in a couple of weeks, and it was done. So think about the right setting. Number two, this one is about how you're going to open the conversation. Your approach to ground rules. Now, I don't care whatever it's about. You've got to open it with a positive tone, okay? Be aware of your behavior. prepare, set that positive tone. You've got to use a calm, respectful approach. It's like a friendly greeting, using small talk. How's their day going? I don't care. You've got to find something, right? And you've got to state that purpose clearly. So it might be, hi, Joe. I'd like to discuss some observations about the recent delays in producing that quarterly project report and see how we can improve things moving forward. So it's very specific. It's not, oh, Joe, you've got, the subtext is Joe's issued it late. It's causing us loads of problems. It's like, oh, let's have a look at how we're doing it to see how we can resolve it. And you've got to be a kind of neutral observer, okay? And establish mutual respect. You've got to let the other person know that their perspective is valued and that they're heard. And an example of a way you can do that is, I want to understand your approach to producing the reports and work out a solution together in terms of understanding what's working and what isn't working. You may have to set ground rules if it's a real tough one. And you may have to agree how to communicate. So you might have, if it's somebody you just don't get on with and you're always arguing with, it might be, okay, let's agree to listen to each other's point of view and keep the conversation focused on finding the solutions for both of us. So then you're kind of saying, look, I know we don't get on. We've come to loggerheads quite a lot, but let's just listen to each other's, let's agree to listen to each other's point of view. Okay. So number 3 is, this is about actively listening and understanding their point of view so you can problem solve together. So in your preparation, think about your outcome. What messages do you need to get across? And for their outcome, what evidence or examples do you have that will help you get that message across to them? Okay. Then I want you to, so that's around how you're going to communicate. Then I want you to think about how you're going to manage your reactions and responses to objections. Okay. So be aware that they may not agree with you or they might object to something. Anticipate them. So what might their objectives be? What counter arguments might they have? And then what counter arguments can you prepare to have for their objections? How are you going to respond to those? Because often people don't think about that, and then they go in and then it all erupts and they're like, oh, I didn't really think Joe was going to do that. Well, and if I'd thought about it, then I'd have something ready. And you might have facts to back you up, whatever it is, but think about their reactions. The next one is around managing the emotional interactions. So think about what emotions or behaviors they might display, and then what response for your reactions. What response do you need to make to give that meeting the best chance of success? So in terms of those emotions earlier, they may break down. So if I'm going to tell somebody and I think they may break down, how am I going to deal with it? What am I going to do? What am I going to say? How am I going to navigate that moment? You've got to stay calm and composed. If emotions do rise, take a deep breath and just get back to that steady tone. Okay. If the conversation gets heated, just suggest you take a break. I think we need a moment to cool down. Let's continue in 10 minutes. Okay. And then during the conversation, you've got to practice, you've got to turn your listening skills right up. Okay. Give them full attention, maintain eye contact. Maybe you've got to nod, use verbal acknowledgements like, oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, I understand that. Avoid interrupting them. Okay. Let them finish their thoughts before you respond. That's a hard one, right? Because it's so easy. You're so in the mind of I know what I'm going to say, but I really want you to think about, I'm not going to interrupt. Okay. I want you to adopt a curious mindset. Your goal is to fully understand their perceptions and feelings around what's happened, depending on what it is. And managing your internal voice, right? Um, if you find yourself going, oh God, what planet is Joe on? What is she talking about? You've really got to you got to stop that inner voice in your head and get it away from, because it's going to influence how you respond. You're not kind of present in the moment if you let it take control like that. And ask open-ended questions about their perspective on what happened. What was the impact on them? What was their intention at the time? What were the feelings? What was the meaning around what happened? So you've got to, there's a hell of a lot more to these conversations, and this is all about the preparation, so that it's going to make it easier to execute because you've got this framework, okay? And then you want to stay focused on the issue. Start with what matters most. Don't make assumptions. Do a reality check to find out what's going on. Use a neutral tone. Don't exaggerate. Well, oh, we've always done this, or we've never done that. Right? Include. I want you to avoid bringing up past problems. Keep this conversation on the current issue and address one topic at a time. And don't present your conclusions as the truth or impose your story as the truth. Okay. Share where your conclusions come from. Learn their story and truly understand it from their perspective. And yeah, don't should on people. This is a really awful one. Oh, you should have. Well, you should have done that, or you should have done that. I've heard people doing it, and it's just horrendous because what does that do? Even me doing that to you down the screen, it probably feels uncomfortable, right? It's things like, have you thought about doing X, or would it be useful to call the client on Wednesday instead of waiting for them to make that call on a Friday? So do you see that? It's not the pointy finger thing going on. Um, and even if you know what they should be doing, you can say, I really appreciate it if you could do X, because that way, Y, whatever it is. Instead of you should be doing X, right? It's just a different, it lands differently, doesn't it? And it's these subtle communication shifts that you want to make with your language and how it comes out, that you can prepare your responses. Remember, there's three perspectives, right? There's their story, your story, and the third story. And that the third story is seen through the eyes of somebody observing, a non-biased third party. What would they see? If they watched your interaction, what would they see? And I really want you to think about developing your emotional intelligence. That's what a lot of this is about today. Being aware of your own emotions, the emotions of others, and it can really help you to navigate these conversations much more confidently. You've got to acknowledge how people feel, okay, and you've got to communicate that you understand whatever it is. So I understand that you've been under a lot of pressure lately, whatever it is you're going to say, and validate their perspective. Okay. Even if you disagree, recognize their viewpoint. So it could be something like, I can see that situation could be frustrating for you. So really think about, it's not, there's no, you can't blame them, right? If you go blaming them and it's, you should have done this and you should, it's just not going to get you anywhere. And then you want to be problem solving together, okay? You want to share a kind of definition of the problem, identify the root cause of it, and then, given what you and the other person have learned, what's the way forward that satisfies both of your needs, that makes a kind of compromise on both sides? And be aware that you might have to give in a little bit. You don't want to give in all the way. necessarily, but you might, okay, I can live with that. Okay. And make sure that you get the solutions together and make them feel like a partner in figuring it out, so that almost they feel like they found the solution. Okay. Because they will feel valued and listened to and respected if you do that, as opposed to you going in there saying, right, I know exactly what I'm going to get Joe to do. And at the end of it, it's like, yeah, okay, so you're going to do this, 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 this. It, it just doesn't work. Okay. Um, and there's a number of purposes that don't make any sense, right? Now, these include short-term venting with long-term costs. So, yeah, you might feel better, but what happens next time when your paths crossed? So just be aware of that short-term venting and the long-term cost that it might have. The hit and run perspective as well, just getting your perspective out there. It might help you to, unsuppress your frustration. But is it really going to achieve a constructive outcome? You know, it might be, well, I know because of this, 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 and I'm going to tell you, Penny. But is it, if you tell me, is it, what's the, how is that going to move things forward? Okay. The last one is around the conclusion and follow up. Now, this is the bit where people often slip up because they don't do it. Okay. So what are the next steps? Prioritize them, summarize them, recap them, plan, define, and agree the actions, who's doing them and by when. And it can't be, okay, so let's have a weekly check-in to track our progress, agree what's going to happen, assign the responsibilities. The other thing is express appreciation. Okay, thank them for their time and effort, and acknowledge their participation, right, and willingness to engage in it. Because we've just had a difficult, this has been tough, and I really want to acknowledge and thank you for that, for for getting us to that resolution. And then the last one is follow up on the agreements. Make sure you've got accountability. So plan a future. Don't just go out of the room thinking, right, that's it. I've done my bit. That's it. No, you've got to plan a future meeting to review the progress and address any ongoing issues. Because you might have got, say you had 3 issues, you might have got rid of 1, but you've still got 2 to go. Okay, so evaluate how things are going and then send a summary of the meeting with the next steps and by when and who's responsible. And if you think it's an HR type conversation, make sure you record everything, write down the key points for future reference, to main accountability and clarity. Okay, and it may be that it's confidential records, so there may be certain situations that you need to adhere to according to different policies. If it's a disciplinary, for example. So I hope that's kind of helped you. And by following that 4-step framework, you can approach difficult conversations with much more confidence and be more effective with them, so that you've got a much more positive environment and you feel more confident about having them. So what I want you to think about is, what's the first bold action, the one action that you're going to implement immediately? How are you going to monitor that development? Who's going to hold you to account? I want you to really think about it, because I want you to get the momentum, okay? But you've got to get the momentum to keep that going. Now you might, you might be thinking, right, I now know I need to do X, Y, Z. You might have more than one action. I hope you do actually, but at least what's the first bold action you're going to take right now? Because you've got the opportunity right now to aim high and take bold action and create your own success. Take the time to develop your skill set. Do more preparation for those difficult conversations so that you build your confidence. Take a leap of faith, because what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay. It's a time for you to create your own success. and you've got the opportunity to develop your leadership mastery so that you can have confident conversations. Now, I hope you've identified some quick wins today. You've got, maybe that's around more clarity around understanding what your own barriers are. Maybe it's having a deeper understanding of how to handle reactions, or you've got that framework and you now know, right, oh, now I know how I'm going to prepare for those. But we've only, today I've only dipped my toe in the water on what you need to do. Just imagine the opportunity to take a deep dive into everything you've thought about today and completely revolutionize how you deal with difficult conversations. Well, you can do that as part of my Aim High coaching program. And it's, you've got someone who can get you out of your own head, get rid of those limiting beliefs, have confident, meaningful conversations. And when I've worked with people, it's incredible to see some of the transformations that have happened with them. And it's I recently helped somebody through a real tough business conversation. And what he said to me was, afterwards, he said, I could never have achieved the successful outcome that I got without my help. So I know coaching works, because what he said was he was able to deal with it privately and really unpack it with somebody to understand what the route through was. And this was a big, big conversation that this senior executive had to have. So I just want you to understand the benefits around that. And in terms of, you might be thinking, well, can I face all those challenges I wrote down today? But it is possible to have those confident, courageous conversations, and it's easier than you think. But you've got to want to achieve it, and you've got to be excited about it, right? Because this is not an easy topic, but I want you to be excited about it, because I want you to get rid of all that fear and anxiety for good. Okay, and it's going to unleash your true potential, because I know you can do it. I've seen people do it. Okay, but it just takes a little bit of work, and you've got to take that bold action. So if you're serious about tackling difficult conversations head on, deciding right now that you're going to deal for it, you're going to go for it and deal for it once for all, so you can set yourself up for success in the future, then booking your Aim High success call with me is the first step to achieving your goal. For those of you with phones, what you can do is you open up your camera, push it towards the screen, and then it takes a little shot of that quick response code, which takes you straight through to my booking system. You can just book a call with me and we can have a chat. And on that call, I will give you two things that will help you. I'm going to help you get clarity on the main barrier that you're having with difficult conversations, understand how it's holding you back. And then I'm going to help you work out one major bold action that you need to take so you can have more effective conversations. And then through that conversation, we'll see if we want to work together. So whilst I'm doing that, I also want you to remember this is your get out of jail bold action call. Okay, so because you can create that successful future that you want, you just got to take your action, right? And for me, it's never just doing something, it's bold. It's got to be bold. Okay. Now, I want you to, whilst you're doing that, booking your call, I put the code up there on the right hand side. I want to be of service to you to help you work through those things that are stopping you. And my free guide is that workbook, which accompanies, it's got my 4-step framework in it with all the detail around what I've talked to you today. And I hope you find that useful. And Joe will be talking about how that's going to be distributed at the end of the session. And whilst you're booking your call, I just want to I want to go to Joe in a minute if anyone's got any questions. If you want to stay on, maybe there's something you want to ask at the end of the session, that's fine. And for any of you that are with organizations, make sure that I want you to know that I not only do these types of things with individuals, I come into organizations and help sort out lots of different areas. So if your organization is looking for some support, then let's have a conversation. Okay. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is I love this quote. I think it's great. when we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. I absolutely love that. I love it. And with that, I'm going to wish you a great day. Please stay in touch with me. You can email me, look at my website, all sorts of different ways to stay in contact. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, subscribe to my email list. And with that, Joe, I think we can stop the recording. And please, would you like to do your final closing?
Yeah, that's great. There's just one question that I've just seen come up, Penny.
Yeah.
I don't know if Nicola's still on. She's just said, if there's time at the end, could you advise on how to do the invitation to the meeting itself? How much to say or not to say? I don't know if that's something you can discuss now.
Yeah, okay. When you're doing the invitation, you probably want to have there's two parts to it really. So you probably want to have a conversation with the person to say, "Oh, hi Joe. I know that I'm looking to discuss XYZ. What's your diary looking like this week? And in the meeting, this is, give them a kind of rough agenda. So you kind of set them up for it. Now, if it's redundancy or something really awkward, it's like, there'll be other processes that are kicking in, right? But if it's a behavioral thing, for example, hi Joe, I'd like to have can we have a conversation about how things are going with the project right now? And then you list, a few points. Don't list the behaviors. List, some things that you want to discuss that that you can bring on to bring out those behaviors. So have the conversation first, and then when you send the appointment, put that agenda inside the appointment so they've got an idea. Because there's nothing worse than somebody saying, "Oh, have you got?" And I hate it, and I never do it. That thing when someone says, "Oh, Penny, have you got 5 minutes, please?" And they don't say what that 5 minutes is about. Because I'm telling you, when I've had that, "Have you got 5 minutes, please?" They're often pretty awful conversations, and I can remember redundancy being one of them, which was the start of it. So every time I hear that, I'm definitely triggered. Have you got 5 minutes, please, with no context? Don't do that to people. It's just not fair. Just set it out so that they've got an idea. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Penny. There isn't anything else come through unless something comes through in the next few seconds. I'll just
Okay, great.
As I've put on the chat, I'll send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event, and I put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of the follow-up information from Penny or a copy of the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. Our next event is on Tuesday, the 10th of June, and is called Avoiding Grievances and Tribunals, the Lost Art of Conversation. Next Tuesday, our sister company, Charity Recruit, is holding an event on the 20th of May called The Key to Supporting Talent Across All Ages, Building Resilience. A link to sign up for these will be included in the email. If anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit, charity recruit, and exec recruit within the group. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to you, Penny, for your time and effort in putting the event together, and for everyone for tuning in. Thank you.